Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. This one is the wind event that's currently going on. It is a raid event, and that means that anybody can basically do this event. You just need to request help with the when you start raids, or just jump into somebody else's raid. But because this is a raid event, you get a free SR Kamihime, so that's something you definitely want to make sure you pick up, because you never know. You may or may not need free SR Kamihime depending on later stuff, especially towers. Also, there is a heroic difficulty fight for this one. If I remember correctly, they will continue doing heroic difficulty fights for raid events, but at one point they'll stop with Advent. Either way, there's something they add on later on called Heroic Record, so don't worry if you're unable to clear this heroic, you'll get another shot at it later. But anyways, because this is a raid event, you have to go through all the storyline, and then you'll be able to start getting materials in order to open up the Ragnarok and Ragnarok Plus fights. Expert, you don't need any materials to jump into, just fight it and just grab your stuff. However, Expert is your only means of getting the devils, the Divine Souls, which is the blue ones, if you do not clear Ragnarok Plus, because it is still random on Ragnarok Plus. If you want a guaranteed drop for Divine, it's Expert. If you want a guaranteed drop for Devil, which is the red ones, do Ragnarok. Ragnarok Plus will not guarantee either one. It's just random what you get. But anyways, you need to do Expert in order to open up Ragnarok or Ragnarok Plus. Ragnarok Plus needs twice the materials of Ragnarok. But honestly, it's kind of hard to tell which one's easier to grind if you just grind either the first two or Ragnarok Plus. Again, it's random on what souls you get, so if you're really lucking out, you can do Ragnarok Plus and get the shortest grind that way. Otherwise, you'll have to keep hitting Expert or Ragnarok. You don't need to clear Heroic difficulty, it's just for a special medal to put on your profile. However, if you are going to take it on, Fire is the way to go, because you'll have to deal with the one mechanic that's been there before, where if you do it with any other elements besides fire, they won't land debuffs, and then on top of that, their damage will be drastically reduced. I've come to find out it's not exactly 90%, but it feels like it given the debuffs and everything. Like the lack of defense down and all that, your efficiency definitely does get cut down by 90%. But the damage itself isn't. The damage itself is like, I think, 2/3 of it gone. And that's something that people have tested out. I've seen it myself. But to even attempt Heroic, you need to clear Ragnarok Plus. So make sure of that. You also need to be at least rank 100. And you probably should anyways, because Heroic is exceptionally hard to do without S-Class souls. So that's something to know. But anyways, there's of course free SSR stuff. Any of the newer players is probably going to want to try and get those. Again, Kamihime, you can just get that one. There's also Gacha Kamihime you can pull for as well. I don't know if I haven't been on the game for a few days. I don't know if they brought back the old wedding characters, but they should have. And there should be some new wedding characters to pull for, because this is indeed like a wedding thing, and that counts as seasonal, so these characters are limited. So keep that in mind. So if you're going to pull for any characters, this is probably a good time, because they're limited. They will come back though. So it's not like you'll be able to pull for them all the time, but you'll have another shot at them, if that makes sense. But anyways, getting into the fights themselves. Expert difficulty, 7.2 million HP, 3 turns before it uses either of its bursts into like normal or raging, like 3 orbs. Normal is going to do random damage and then put defense up on itself. Raging is going to do AoE damage and put defense up on itself. This is the whole thing about the fight. It's constantly putting defense up on itself, so it's going to try and really cut the damage you do to it. Kind of makes sense considering the fact that, in general, Wind seems to be either very resistant, hits often, or has like either debuff immunity or just a lower chance of debuffs working on them. So that kind of counts as resistance, but in a different way. So they're pretty resilient against damage too, on top of debuff resistance. But the triggers. Now, the first time, like the first action it takes, it's going to do AoE Dizzy, and it can last for 6 turns. You're probably going to want to protect yourself against this or remove it. And it also puts defense up to itself. Now, that's something you really have to be very careful about, because Dizzy can really start interrupting your turns, especially since we don't know exactly how often it will go off, because there's a chance it will go off and a chance it won't. Just take it off of yourself, remove it, and just don't even try to worry about it. And then half HP or less, it's going to defense buff, and then on top of that, it's going to give HP recovery to itself. So that's something to worry about. But if you're strong enough, you probably could take it out pretty quickly. Just remember that when it heals itself and puts defense buffs, it's going to prolong the fight. That's always an issue. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated on Ragnarok, because we're fighting a completely different enemy. Still wind element, but it's 15 million HP to go through. Now, this is going to be a little bit complicated to read, so bear with me on this one. But depending on what gun it has, it's going to determine what bursts it does and what triggers it does. So that's something to know. When the right gun is prepared, it's going to cancel itself afterward, but it's also going to deal damage. So that's something to know. And it's the same case with the left gun, but the damage is higher. So that's something to know. Be very careful with normal mode, because it seems when its right gun is ready, it's going to be more devastating. Now, in raging mode, when the right gun is prepared, it's going to do AoE damage and then cancel to the left. When the left gun is prepared, it's going to do large damage, and usually raging large damage will hit you so hard you'll lose massive chunks of HP. So depending on what your team basically is, the left or the right gun can actually be more trouble. So that's something to know. That's something to be very, very careful about. So pay very close attention to which gun is up. It seems that right gun is going to more or less do AoE, and then left gun is going to do large single target nukes. So pay very close attention. This is probably the point in the game where they're going to start releasing a lot of enemies that have that type of mechanic where you have to pay attention to the buffs and all that. We've seen that a few raid events before. Now, when it comes to the triggers, it starts off the first turn preparing its left gun, so it's always going to be in a gun state. But when its HP is 40% or less, it's going to remove all of its debuffs and also do a wind damage to your entire team. But that's if its charge turns isn't max. And then on top of that, it will switch between the guns when its charge turns aren't max. So if it's in the left gun state, it's going to do single target damage and put defense down. When it's in right gun state, it's going to put its own attack power, increase its own attack power. So that's something to know. That's something to be very wary about, because you do not want to deal with either one of those situations if you can. So you probably need some buff removal and maybe some debuff protection as well for this fight. Especially considering that if defense down is on you and attack up is on itself, it's going to really hit hard. It may even be one-shot range depending on your HP, so that's incredibly dangerous. And it's only got 2 orbs too before it goes into any of its bursts, so it's not going to do those attacks too often, because of its short orb count, but keep in mind that those buffs and debuffs still translate into damage for the enemy burst, so be very careful. And Ragnarok Plus basically does the same stuff. It just adds one more trigger, and on top of that, a previous one has been changed. The previous one that's been changed is instead of 40%, it'll remove all of its debuffs and recover back to normal status at 50% HP or less. So half gone instead of 40%. And at 25% HP or less, it's going to deal large damage, do attack and defense down to your entire team, and it's also going to put its own attack and defense up. So that's a lot to try and deal with at the last 25%. And keep in mind, Ragnarok Plus is 72 million HP. You're going to want to take out that last 1/4 of its health very quickly. That's probably the time everybody should just unload their full burst if they have it ready. Because that last 25% is definitely going to be a pain. Now, Heroic. This is going to be kind of weird to deal with, but the big gimmick with the first fight is that, first off, it has 110 million HP for the first fight, and it's got 4 orbs. But the big gimmick with the first fight for Heroic, it's going to deal 99% of your max HP to the entire team. So everybody's going to be stuck with 1% of their HP remaining. But it's going to put regen that's permanent on your team. And it says it regens up to 2,000, I do believe. And then on top of that, when it bursts, it's also going to heal everybody by 2,000, up to 2,000 HP. The reason being is because of the simple fact that if anyone hits full HP, you're going to see them die. If anyone hits full HP, you're going to see them die. That's a big thing about this first stage for the Heroic. Also, when its HP is 35% or less, it's going to try and heal 1/3 of the HP to everybody, so it's really want to try and do that. And it also seems like it's going to counter your combo rate too, because it looks like it's going to be based on how many hits that you do. So if you don't land 10 hits, then it's probably not going to do this. That's what it's looking like on the JP Wiki. Sorry if I'm not seem sure or clear about it. Sometimes Google Translate isn't the best. But the deal with this is the fact that it's going to really try to put your HP back to full after that first turn. And when anybody's HP goes back to full, prepare to see some deaths. That's the big gimmick for the first fight. The second fight, however, goes back to the whole gun thing, like the like Ragnarok or Ragnarok Plus. And this enemy has 130 million HP for the second fight. Still has a 2 orb count, but again, it's going to just deal with all of that type of stuff. And then on top of that, it's going to remove all buffs as well. So that's something to remember. It's going to remove all your buffs as well. But generally, it's going to be more or less the same fight as the Ragnarok thing. There's just 2 changes to it. Half HP or less is going to remove all buffs and debuffs, so it's like a full-on reset. And then on top of that, it's also going to deal wind damage to your entire team. So half HP is going to nuke you. On top of that, if you do 11 hits or more, it's going to do wind damage to one person. So depending on your setup, this may or may not help you. It does say small damage, so you may want a combo rate for this fight. Because if that's the case, it's going to prevent it from buffing itself. and prevent it from debuffing you. So combo rates are really going to come into play for heroic difficulty. And Win has pretty good access to combo rates, so that's something to know. It's very gimmicky. More than the previous ones. And then on top of that too, I think the total HP that we're taking out for this heroic is actually more than the previous ones. It's 240 million. And for a comparison, Bether has slightly more HP at 250 million. So it's almost like soloing a Guardian raid, just in 2 parts. So be very warned about that one. This is why heroic difficulty tends to be recommended at like 75,000 power, because at that point you probably should be able to solo. You probably should be able to solo at 75,000 power. Now, heroic recommendations, because of the combo rate thing, they're recommending Paracelsus. It's hard to pronounce her name, but she's all about normal attacks and she can force a lot of hits to go off. So that said, she's highly recommended for this heroic. Shurama, or it's hard to pronounce her name. She's very, very durable, but also can dish out some decent damage. I'm unsure if they've given the changes to the souls yet, like given the rework to S-class souls, because if they did, those two I just mentioned are going to be even more stronger. They're going to be one of the top. They're going to be some of the top priority souls to actually go after. At least when it comes to any type of offensive types of setups. So remember those two. If you don't get them now, you may want them later. And of course, Romulus is always recommended. Asclepius is always recommended. Those two greatly help you out when it comes to survivability, because these fights are really helpful. However, the first fight, you want to hold off with Asclepius' heals, because remember, if your HP is full, you've basically failed. So that's something to remember. You do want revives, but you don't want to heal in the first fight of heroic, because you're already on a timer based on how quickly your HP gets back to full. However, that does leave an interesting thing. Fire tends to have pretty reasonable access to Pride. And then they're basically a glass cannon type of element anyways for the most part. So, right setup, you might actually be able to run through the first fight pretty quickly. It depends on how strong you are. Now, they also recommend some Kamihime as well. Daki definitely has some time to shine right here, mainly because of the fact that she can up everybody's combo rate. They also recommend Apollo, because you know the cut. They recommend Azazel only because of the fact that Azazel's just so good you can use her off element anyways, at least if you've awakened her. But keep in mind that if you're using somebody that's off element, then they're not going to do too much in terms of offense. And then Konohana Sakia is recommended too for like a damage cut as well. She's SR, but it still helps. So that's something to know. I've done a heroic with SR if you've seen the video, so it's possible to do these with SR characters. And also on the recovery side, I don't think I really need to explain too much on the recovery side of things. You should know who heals for fire. But if you can't do that, then Azazel kind of acts like a cut and a heal, so there's that. And then maybe just go off element with somebody that can actually withstand it, like Soul. Because you don't want the original version Dion set, because Dion is very, very good as a healer. But you want her fire version, because Thunder's just going to take more damage. So that's something to know. But others that can help too. Again, combo rate seems to be very, very valued for this heroic, so that's something to really have there. And of course, you definitely want some you definitely want debuffers as well, so you can do the most damage possible. I mean, they're going to get removed at halfway through the second part of heroic, but you're going to want debuffers, because do as much damage as you possibly can. Those fights are on a timer, more or less. because the second fight isn't as strict as a timer, but the more the boss buffs itself and debuffs you, the more it becomes a war of attrition. And the first fight is clearly on the timer, because remember, your HP is put down to next to nothing. And then it's going to try and heal you back to full just to finish you off should anybody get full HP. So be very careful. Me personally, I've built up quite a few weapon grids or whatnot, but I'm even unsure if my fire team can handle this one. You'll see a heroic clear video if they can, but quite frankly, I feel like I have to have more HP before I can even try to do that, and that's not necessarily the case right now, so. But they also recommend different types of Eidolons. I'm not sure why they recommend an SR, but I'm guessing it's because it's got resistance to wind, maybe? But there's SSR Eidolons that should give you some like resistances to like wind and all that as well. And then SSR Diablos is good for like teams where if you have to go off element for something, like say you needed a healer and then maybe some extra cut, you can do a team like Soul, who they recommended, Light Soul, and then get Awakened Azazel, Awakened Soul, Awakened Azazel, and then have 3 fire. That's the best way to use SSR Diablos. I cover that in so many different videos because of the fact that SSR Diablos is very, very, very underrated. She's not one of the best Eidolons, but she is very strong when used right. My opinion, when used correctly, she is just as good as the Guardian Eidolons when it comes to dealing damage. It's just the fact that the Guardians will up other stuff too, like HP and all that. But I'm even questioning if the Machine Beast can actually give you more damage output than Diablos. At least SSR Diablos when you use her correctly, so that's something to know. That's personal opinion, but she's underrated in my opinion as well, so there's that. And naturally too, if you have either Dragoon, whether it's the fire one for SSR or the fire one for SR, take them. They buff elemental attack and wind resistance. I don't think I need to explain that any further. Also, some sad stuff that might help too is like Eidolons that give you like stuff like defense, or they even suggest enthusiasm too, because of the fact that you do want to pull out burst and deal as much damage as quickly as possible. I also would have to suggest maybe some damage cut or barrier type Eidolons as well. They do exist. There's like some that'll give you defense or like elemental resistance. Well, aside from the Dragoons, there's others that should give elemental resistance. But also, again, you definitely would want to have like a barrier just in case, if you want to just stack a whole bunch of defenses. I don't think I need to go over the weapons, but yeah. And yeah, they say clear as day right here, like if an enemy can attack and their HP is fully recovered, you will be forced to die instantly. It says it literally right here. So, you're on a timer in the first fight. And get used to that, because that mechanic's going to come up a lot. Not necessarily in that way, but we're going to be on timers and a lot more heroics later on. And even some raids as well. Now then, the rewards for this, same old stuff as we had before. I did find out that this is a very good time to try and get +1 weapons and Eidolons. They've reduced the chances of pulling jewels from out of the gacha, but the +1 weapons and the +1 Eidolons have had an increased chance to make up for it. Those of you that feel like you're not getting enough from them from the gem gacha, start stocking up on as many raid tickets as you can get and try to pull them from here. Also, there is an increased rate of SSR that's been confirmed, because you're not getting as many tickets as before. So some of the better stuff has got increased rates. Remember that. But as for rewards, and there is a lot of different weapons, like I said, in my previous video, don't worry about anything that's not SSR at this point, because we have too much stuff that is very, very good. Speaking of which, this wind hammer that we get from this event might actually have some use. It depends on your previous weapons. If you have gotten enough Garuda hammers, you can toss this into a hammer grid for wind. So that's something to note. Just remember, you don't get final limit break with this weapon. So it does have large assault, it does have medium defender, but it can't final break. But it is part of a hammer grid if you need at least one more hammer to try and fill the slots. So those of you that's gotten enough Garuda hammers, you might be able to pull this off. As for the Idolin herself, she's like, it says attack up as the HP of the wind attribute character increases. My guess is that she's vigor. If I'm looking at this correctly, she's like a vigor effect. So that's something to know. And yeah, I don't see if it's confirmed or not. I'm guessing she's like vigor, but it depends. Now, embarrassment is I think it's like dizzy, but it's like user-sided. So that's something to remember. Embarrassment's like a user-sided type of debuff that can sometimes remove the enemy's chance to attack or anything like that. So it's situational. It really is. A lot of stuff like that tends to get resisted now, so be kind of careful about the when an enemy's resistant to certain things, because you may or may not land certain types of debuffs or status effects. So embarrassment's interesting, but first of all, it's user-sided, so doing it won't help anybody but yourself. So in raids, you're only really helping yourself on that one. Second is the fact that there's a lot more enemies that are getting very resistant to certain things, so pay close attention. Pay very close attention. And like I said, I don't need to go over the SR weapons because, you know, they're outdated at this point. The only good thing for SR weapons after you've started getting some better stuff is just to use them as fodder. Because you will quickly get SSR weapons at this stage of the game. You can go into Epic Quests and just go start loading up on a bunch of them. Go do weekly advents, go do events. SSR is not hard to come by at this point. So, that said, don't ever worry about SR weapons. Just worry about SSR. Especially considering the fact that we're going to have even more of them later on. Some of which are going to be very, very grindable at all times. So, now, the missions, I don't think I need to explain these too much more because it's the same stuff for the last ones. You know you have to soul each of the raid difficulties. Just clear Ragnarok with Dark Team and you're good to go. I should be able to do that considering I had a Dark Team clear Heroic, so. And then, that's something else I have to point out as well. When it comes to dealing with certain elements, there are a lot of free weapons that can really help you out. That's how I really beefed up my Dark Team in order to clear that Heroic. So, pay close attention to what you have access to. At least for the Guardian raids, for sure, because those are grindable. But we'll have another method later on that will help out players, so remember that. But in the case of Guardian weapons for fire, they're not too good now, but I heard the staff is pretty good later on, so if you can't clear this Heroic, you may want to grind out some Guardian staffs from Phaleg. If I remember her name correctly, she's a Fire Guardian. It's hard to pronounce some of these names sometimes. Last thing I have to go over are free Kamihime. She's Darkness Element. And I remember her because she had a interesting tentacle scene. But, anyways, she's all about helping everybody but herself. There's one exception when she bursts. Now, when she bursts, that allows all of her effects to affect herself, the next ability. And when it does, she's going to get even more of an effect, thanks to her assist ability. That's how she works. She's all about helping others before helping herself. The only exception is when you deal the burst. In that case, she'll turn into something like Aphrodite, where she'll help everyone but help herself more. But her main gimmick is to sip and help everybody else first. And her abilities aren't too bad, to be quite honest. I mean, they're kind of standard for an SR Kamihime, but they aren't too bad. First one's a barrier of 1,000. And barriers are becoming a little bit more common. So, you got a free barrier Kamihime to have right here. Second, attack up A-frame, 15%. Now, this may or may not clash with a few other Kamihime. So, if it does, the best thing to do is actually alternate them. Because of the fact that when you alternate buffs, you essentially stay powered up for longer. Debuffs are the ones you don't want to alternate because you cannot. If a weaker debuff is in play, you just shouldn't use it. But when it comes to buffs themselves, a good strategy is just to alternate them. I do that sometimes too. In fact, I really do that a lot with one of my light teams because I have a combo rate buff from Bao, a combo rate buff from Michael, and when those two are off, I toss on Yuri's combo rate buff. And that will give me roughly 6 turns of increased combo rate. And it's very powerful. But the whole thing with her assist, it says that her effect is doubled for herself. So any of these is going to double for her. It doesn't say how much debuff resistance you get from her third ability, but the regen is 300. So it's like a few turns of 300 regen, like 900 HP basically. On her case, she gets 1800 if it lands on herself. Her barrier is 2000 on herself, and her attack up buff is like 30%. I don't know what the it says sneak attack probability. I don't know what that is either because it's not saying it on this wiki. But remember, that's Stinger and that's another multiplier. The time you probably want Stinger is through buffs. So that said, she's actually quite useful, at least for certain setups. I would say she's worth using in tower whenever we have like a light tower. So remember that. This is very good for a Kamihime's kit. And then me personally, I kind of do like her design. I honestly do. Like, I kind of see what some people said on my Discord. Like, that I do like her design. Well, my Union Discord, not my Discord. But my Union's Discord, there's a few people that like her. I kind of get why. Her design is actually pretty good. But she's free, so go after her, go get her. Free Kamihime in these raid events are very, very quick to get. I've even played the JP side and got one already, and my team on there isn't all that strong. It's a water team with 41,000. They can solo fire ultimate already, but I'm up against a thunder enemy. So, JP side, I'm going to struggle in this event. Thankfully, it's a raid event. This side, however, for global, it's not too hard to get this character as long as you're not using thunder. In which case, you'll probably struggle a little bit. You're absolutely not going to be able to clear Heroic without a fire team. I'm pretty sure of that, though. But anyways, that's all for now. More of this will come soon. Again, if I'm able to clear Heroic, I will indeed have a video for that. Speaking of which, there should be another video to come up pretty soon. It's going to be a redo of one of my old guides for Eidolons, so look forward to that at some point. I did record it before, but I didn't like how the recording came out, so I just got rid of it. And I'm just going to record it again. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon, and take care.